Welcome to MetroSTL.com. I'm Charles Jaco, and today we're pleased to be joined by Andrew Jones. Mr. Jones, a businessman in the area, and more importantly to our purposes, candidate for mayor in the March 2nd primary election, nominally a Republican. This is, of course, is a nonpartisan election under the new rules set up by the city of St. Louis. Mr. Jones, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
No, it's my absolute pleasure to be here and to answer any questions that you may have and hopefully be able to answer questions for people who want to assess me.
Understood. We're going to concentrate on crime today because I think just about everyone agrees that is the largest issue facing St. Louis right now is the proliferation of violent crime. You have talked before about, quote, unleashing the St. Louis Police Department in order to deal with violent crime in the city. Specifically, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by unleashing, it means effectively and conscientiously allowing the police to conduct and do their job. They are well-trained professionals, but right now they're being handcuffed, and no pun intended, and they can't get out and execute their jobs to deal with a very small group of people that are committing over about 80% of the violent crime. And I know we talk about crime, but I think the emphasis that you talked about with the homicides, the violent adjective on it is the key, because if 80% of the problems are with the violent crime, and it's a very small percentage of people committing these heinous crimes, there's an easy way to fix it, and that's by letting our police officers do the jobs that they're trained for.
Well, specifically, what are you talking about? In what ways have they been hamstrung in your mind, and what specifically would you do as mayor to release them from that?
Well, it gets back to the part and the definition of leadership, if you may. If they are equipped with the exact same data, the information I have, and anytime you have a triage scenario where you have someone who may come in with a heart attack, but you're treating a broken foot, you're not doing something right with leadership in assessing what the problems are. Again, when it gets down to the police, they do lead policing, intelligent led policing. They do the broken windows with James Wilson. They do all of those peripheral things, and they do it well. They do it absolutely well, but they also execute and do their jobs well when it comes to apprehending those who will undertake criminal activity that certainly puts our city in a disadvantage. It certainly puts our city in a position where they can't execute at high levels to get rid of those who are committing those violent crimes. And I'm suggesting that without the proper leadership, that will continue. It will embolden people, and we want to be able to move forward by apprehending those criminals who conduct themselves in that manner. And this is not calculus. This is very simple, of allowing people who are criminals to be taken seriously and to be taken off the streets so that civilized people can get the job done and move forward and changing the trajectory of their lives.
Let's be a little more specific about that. In the city of St. Louis, a little fewer than half of people who commit murders are apprehended. In some neighborhoods where the murder problem is the worst, whether it's the Ville or Jeff Vanderloo or any neighborhoods around there, the arrest rate for homicides is around 33%. That means, quite literally, you've got a 2 out of 3 chance in many St. Louis neighborhoods of getting away with murder. So does that mean that the police are simply not up to the task of doing their jobs? And if it doesn't, why then are not more murderers and violent criminals apprehended? Is the problem with the police department and something needs to change?
So we're getting down the path. Absolutely. And these are fantastic questions. Believe it or not, probably some of the best questions specifically in this regard, because now we can really get down to it. Our police know who these criminals are. They know who they are. They're associated with violent gangs, associated with narcotics and drugs. Right now, we have a very apprehensive leadership that doesn't want to get involved, because in today's climate, in those neighborhoods, if the police go out and they apprehend a criminal who is violent, and the job means that it may escalate up to the point where they end up having to kill that criminal, that violent criminal, the negative feedback and impact from it has all of our leadership sitting on their hands, not wanting to pull the trigger, that if, and to get out front, to say, if they executed policy correctly, They did policing at a high level. They tried to disengage, they tried to de-escalate, but it moved to that area. They won't stand out front, and they don't want the political backlash. They don't want the racial backlash that comes from it, because we know what happened this past summer with George Floyd. The rest of the country went berserk because of that. And I'm submitting that the leadership here has taken that into account, won't execute, and won't allow the police to execute because they don't want that backlash. Now, this is after I've accumulated my understanding.
So, are you saying that the political leadership in City Hall is actively preventing police from trying to apprehend and arrest violent criminals and murder suspects, and that's why the arrest rate for those crimes and the solving rate is that low?
I'm submitting that that is the deductive reasoning, and I get paid to deduct and to reason and to solve problems. And if your police are comprehensive, if your police are competent, and this is what I'm saying that they are, why aren't they doing their jobs? And if they're not doing their jobs, someone is holding them back, and the only people that control the police are the leadership.
What about the counter argument that the problem, at least statistically, would indicate that it's not political leadership, but that it's the police officials themselves who are incompetent? If you've got a city police force that eats up around half of the budget for the city of St. Louis, and yet in some neighborhoods they are unable to make arrests in 2 out of 3 murder cases, I would say that that police force is not very effective.
And what I would say in counter to them is that I believe that is an absolute weak argument. And I say it's a weak argument only because we know that a fish rots from the head down. The mayor of the city of St. Louis dictates what happens with the police. If they had full support of leadership, just like any department that I head up, if I am in charge, it starts with me. And you don't hear anything from the mayor or anyone in leadership talking about we want to get those violent elements out of the street. And you never hear them drill down, and I'll be short, you'll never hear them drill down to talk about the drugs and the narcotics and the violent element. They talk about this as if this is some type of random actions. These are orchestrated things associated with the drugs and narcotics, and that in and of itself says they're incompetent to not understand the data that they get, or they're purposefully not getting involved.
There was one case on the South Side where a man is charged with killing the mother of his children and murdering the 2 children. This happened just a few days ago. He had apparently fired shots at that very same porch 2 days beforehand, yet nobody bothered calling the police. One of the problems you have with law enforcement in St. Louis is that you have large segments of the population who, for whatever reason, do not trust the police and will not engage with them and will not call them. How do you propose rebuilding that bond between the police and the community when there is so much distrust, some of it racial, baked into the system right now, so that people just won't call the police almost no matter what happens? How do you fix that?
You fix that by having leadership that has the cachet, that has the wherewithal to be able to get out front and talk about these issues. You mentioned that a significant amount of it is associated with race. I would go so far to try to put a number on it to say that that's probably close to about 90%. Most of the people that you hear who lament and cry about what's going on as far as policing, systemic racism, things of that nature, they put that badge, that scarlet letter, on the police body itself, but they ignore that they are getting their marching orders, they're getting the constructs from the leadership. It is leadership that is causing most of this problem, and you have to get out front with proper PR, proper marketing, not standing behind in the shadows, allowing things to happen the way that they are happening, and you talk with people. One of the things I plan on doing as mayor is getting out front, talking with people about those very critical areas that are necessary to be discussed, so we can move the dialogue forward, so that we can move forward.
Mr. Jones, a final question. You have grown up around this area. You know that the city of St. Louis, for decades now, has always been in the top 10, sometimes maybe higher, in terms of homicides in this country. Why do you think the level of deadly violent crime has been such a persistent problem in the city of St. Louis, not just over the past few years, but over the past few decades. What do you think's going on, and what law enforcement strategies would you have as mayor to try to stop this decades-long pattern?
Well, as quick as I can on that answer is that for years, no one has done anything about the most prevalent component part of it, the drugs and the narcotics and the gangs associated with it. This is not just a St. Louis problem. You'll hear from some of the other candidates say that other urban cities are doing this project or that project. All of those projects, all of those cities are falling under that same category of failing when it comes to the homicides. And I submit to you, and most people will not talk about it, is that the social inequitable conversations that exist that gets conflated with police executing their jobs is emboldening those peripheral criminals, those peripheral crimes. But the main thing that everyone looks at are the violent crime. And if you're not doing anything about it, anything, you're not solving the problems, as you mentioned earlier with the data. That emboldens everything, and it's the catalyst for all the problems. What we have, as I mentioned earlier, are all of the tools necessary to be able to apprehend these criminals. We know who they are. I can't say it any clearer. But we don't have the intestinal fortitude and leadership to direct our police to get out and apprehend these criminals, no matter if it does escalate. So it's the KISS method that you would get in school. Keep it simple, stupid. Some things are not that complicated. It's the Occam razors method. You let the police do their job. We can move like a city like Cincinnati has done since the 1990s, improve their violent homicide rate because they proactively got out to take those violent criminals off the street. So the rest of the citizens, and we have a responsibility to the rest of the citizens, that they can exercise their constitutional rights, their residential rights, to be able to flourish in their neighborhoods, not feel violated, and get them off of the street so that they can execute their citizen rights.
Andrew Jones, candidate for mayor in the March 2nd primary coming up in the city of St. Louis. Mr. Jones, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for taking some time with us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And I'm Charles Jaco. Thank you for joining us today at MetroSTL.com.